And to the United States, where President Donald Trump has suggested November's presidential election be postponed, saying increased postal voting could lead to fraud and inaccurate results. He floated a delay until people could properly, securely, and safely vote. Now, although there is little evidence to support Mr. Trump's claims, but he has long railed against mail-in voting, which he has said would be susceptible to fraud. U.S. states want to make postal voting easier due to public health concerns over the coronavirus pandemic. Under the U.S. Constitution, Mr. Trump does not have the authority to postpone the election himself. But in a series of tweets, Mr. Trump said universal mail-in voting would make November's vote the most inaccurate and fraudulent election in history and a great embarrassment to the U.S. And Professor Ademola Abbas, Global Affairs Analyst, joins me now to discuss more on this development. Good to have you join us. Now, how seriously should this tweet coming from President Trump be taken?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Well, it's a chicken and egg situation. It has to be taken seriously because to start with is can you hear me?
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying that we have to take him very seriously because the tweet came from the sitting president of the United States. And given what the world knows today about Trump, you cannot just dismiss what he has said. So it has to be taken seriously.
So in the event that he decides to press on with this postponement of election, where does Congress stand here? What powers does Congress have?
Well, basically, he has to seek congressional approval for any delay in the voting of the presidentials in the U.S. And don't forget, even if the Congress were to go with it, the Congress itself will require a constitutional amendment for them to be able to, scheme the dates of the new Congress people coming into play, swearing in, and so on and so forth. So there's a panoply of constitutional issues that actually attach to this. So he can suggest, he can say it is not within his competence. But I think what is important also, though, is to try to understand why Mr. Trump is suggesting that, which I think we shouldn't also dismiss. Because whether we like it or not, universal mail-in voting does present some problems. You recall that in June this year, New York State organized one. And until today, some of the results have not been known. There are problems with counting, and sometimes misfilling of forms could also affect the counting of some of those votes. So there are some serious issues in mail-in voting, no doubt about that. However, I think there are more cynical reasons why Mr. Trump is flying that kite.
And so when you consider the alleged Russian interference with America's election in 2016 and the hacking of the democratic system in Iowa during the primaries, does America have the infrastructure to consider or deliver in-mail voting without any fraud?
Well, fantastic question. That is a billion-dollar question. Because as I said, there are so many issues, and I'm happy you have raised some of the examples. Look, when you're talking about smaller states in America, Colorado, Utah, Hawaii, Oregon, and co., those about 6 of them came together and said they were going to do a mail-in voting, a universal mail-in voting. That is fine. But when you talk about large states, like New York, for instance, or California state, then you are talking about a mammoth issues with infrastructural challenges such as you have raised. For instance, as I said, in New York City till today, they are still counting some of the votes of the primary elections for presidential candidates that were held in June. So there are many, many issues, but not all states are equal when it comes to that. And thankfully, it comes down to every state to decide whether it wants to allow it or it doesn't want to allow it. Yeah, there are many challenges. However, having said that, the claim by Mr. Trump that if you allow this voting is going to be the most fraudulent and the most inaccurate in the U.S. history is simply, it doesn't gel. It's just a loud claim.
So, but when you also look at the fact that some say that because of the coronavirus, the way the coronavirus has been handled in America, which has also sort of reduced the economic gains made by the Trump administration, that his chances here are a bit slim, that might be the reason he's calling for the postponement. What would you say to that?
Well, some people have said that, but the truth is, yes, the economic brightness of America today is dim. Everybody knows that Trump had been campaigning very violently on economy and so on and so forth. And he's done a good job to some extent on that. So I think he's concerned about it. There's no question about that. But look, the truth is there are two major parties that are going for that election in November. That's the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. So if you have a mail-in voting, the mail-in voting is not only for the Democratic voters, it's also for Republican voters. So I am not surprised that people like Lindsey Graham, one of the strongest supporters of Trump himself, came out and said that was a bad idea. And the same thing with people like Mitchell McConnell, the Senate leader, the Republican Senate leader, and Mr. McCarthy, on the minority Senate leader. All of them are come to say, look, this doesn't make any sense. So the fact that you have a bipartisan pushback on that idea tells you that it's just a kind of a unnecessary wolf crying, because at the end of the day, if you have mail-in voting, it's not only one party that is going to benefit. So to automatically assume that, oh, if this goes on, it's going to benefit Democratic Party, is to actually conclude that Mr. Trump is afraid that he might lose the election. And if he does lose the election, the question that we should be asking ourselves is, are these groundworks for him to contest the result of that election if he goes on to lose?
Global Affairs Analyst Professor Ademola Abbas, thanks for talking to us.
My pleasure.